Hey there, DW here. Welcome to my channel. This is a place where you can relax and listen to stories found on the internet. Or not. Before we start anything, please subscribe to my channel if you haven't yet. It would be a great help for my tiny little channel to grow. And plus, it's totally free. Well now, let's start by turning down the background, shall we? Today, we'll read some creepypastas, and the story title is How to Survive Camping. I run a private campground. My family has owned it for generations now. It's about 300 acres, most of that shaded by forest, and the rest is an open field. We host events like dog clubs, music festivals, etc. We've also got open camping weekends throughout the year. And in the height of summer, we're open full-time for general camping. A lot of people take advantage of that. It's a cheap and pleasant vacation. Hammocks get erected in the trees. Grills get unloaded from the backs of trucks. There's some pretty elaborate setups from the people that come back year after year. The return campers are smart. They know what they're doing. Everyone knows their job when they roll in. They unload as a group. Tents start to go up. Community areas and kitchens go in the same place year after year. Where they found the land suits their setup best. Tent locations might change, but every camper knows where their tent is going in their allotted land. It's a far cry from the disheveled masses that show up and simply expect everything to work out with no prior planning. By noon, on setup day, the experienced campers are sitting under their day shades, sipping beer, while the newbies are relocating tents because they didn't leave enough room for walkways. I've tried to help. I put together a guide that everyone receives in the mail once I have their registration info and payment. Sure, the postage is a bit of an expense, but I feel having a hard copy makes them more likely to read it. Not having to fill out as much paperwork with the police is worth the money. I've titled the brochure, How to Survive Your Camping Experience. I wish people would take the name more seriously. The first page is full of practical advice. Stuff like 1. Have a sturdy, waterproof container that holds a spare change of clothes and a blanket. This will ensure you have something warm and dry if your tent floods. 2. Place solar lights near your tent stakes. This will keep people from tripping over them or the ropes at night. 3. If the ground is soft from heavy rain, reinforce tent stakes either by weighing them down or by using longer stakes. They can't get pulled out of the ground by a strong wind otherwise. 4. When planning your camp, allocate 3 extra feet per tent. This leaves room for ropes and stakes. The second page is advice more specific to the area. This campsite has been in the family for generations after all, and a parcel of land obtains a sort of significance when it's passed down from heir to heir. It is an old place in the world. Perhaps not an ancient place, but old enough to have attracted the attention of those things that prefer old places to make their homes. We will have to sell the campsites before it becomes an ancient place, as it will become unusable at that point. But there are still many generations to go before that happens. This is the part that the new campers don't take seriously. They think it's a prank. Some little joke of the reclusive camp manager who perhaps doesn't spend much time around other people. The experienced campers try to tell them otherwise, but they don't always listen. I feel my rules aren't onerous. Here's a sampling. 1. If you hear something trying to enter your tent at night, sit up and say in a clear, calm voice that you are not receiving visitors, but it is welcome to visit in the morning. If a stranger appears the next day asking for entrance to your camp, invite them in and give them food and drink. This will give you good luck for the rest of your stay. 2. Fairy rings are generally benign. If there are the remains of a small animal inside the ring, however, inform camp management immediately. 3. Don't follow the lights. I can't believe I even have to say this one. Don't follow the lights. 4. If you see a group of people dancing in a circle around a fire, you may join them. If they welcome you in, dance with them until the music ends. Do not look at the musicians. If they do not welcome you, but instead stop and stare, back away slowly and then leave. If they follow you, you can try to run, but it is likely already too late. Pray that death comes swiftly. I confess it's a haphazard list, but there's a lot of vicious things out there, and they all function in slightly different ways. I do some things as part of camp management in an effort to minimize the danger of my campers. We set out traps for the creatures stupid enough to fall into them, so that they can be dispatched by my uncle and his 2 sons. We're closed during Pentecost, on Midsummer Day, and other significant times of the year. We can't do everything. We can't save people from themselves. Every morning I circle the camp on a 4-wheeler. My staff does the same, a couple times a day. We look for any new developments on the land, a tree that needs pulled down, for example, and campers know they can hail any of us if they need something. I leave directly after I finish my breakfast and a cup of coffee. My house is on the campsite, so it's especially easy for me to take the morning shift. There's never many people awake yet, so it was especially noticeable when I saw a man approaching me ahead, walking down the middle of the road. He looked unremarkable. They always do. But he walked slowly and deliberately, his head bowed so that it was difficult to see his face, and he carried before him in both hands a human skull. I pulled the 4-wheeler over and waited, my stomach twisting with fear. Rule 12. If you're approached by a man offering you a drink from a cup made out of a human skull, accept. It will taste foul, and you will not be able to eat without vomiting for the next 24 hours. But this is better than what he will do to you if you refuse. I have drunk from the cup before. It is how I learned of his existence and subsequently added him to the rules. He stopped me on the road, and at the time, I thought he was a camper needing assistance, until he handed me the skull cup and bade me drink. I did, as I had already learned that when a being of power asks something of you, it is better to comply. It may not be enough to save you. Sometimes they invite you to partake in your own demise, but the odds of compliance are better. He lifted the cup to my lips and I drank. One swallow, another. He kept the cup there. His thin fingers brushed my hair back when it slipped past my ear, and I drank it in entirety. The water inside tasted bitter and salty with a vaginal undertone. My stomach twisted and I swallowed hard, struggling to keep it down. "Thank you for the drink," I said when I was done, trying to sound sincere. He knew I lied, for he smiled briefly in wry humor, his dark eyes flashing with cold amusement. "It was wise to not refuse," he replied. He told me what he would have done had I not drunk, and My insides crawled with horror as he spoke, and I wanted him to stop, but to interrupt would have been a dire insult. His words were etched into my memory, and for days after I wept whenever I thought of the fate I had so narrowly avoided. I still feel cold and small when I think of the things he told me. That evening, I threw up my dinner. I threw up the crackers I ate. I even threw up water. Finally, I stopped eating and drinking altogether, and waited a full day to try again. I was weak and miserable, but I survived. Now, seeing the man approaching on the road, I mentally cursed my misfortune. This was our busy time of the year. I couldn't afford to be sick for a day. He stopped just before he reached me, raised a hand, and beckoned for me to come closer. He didn't raise his head until I stood just across from him, and when he did, he flashed that thin, dry smile at seeing the expression of dread on my face. "Are you not thirsty?" he asked mockingly. "Not particularly, but if you wish to offer me a drink, I will not be so rude as to refuse." My heart hammered in my chest. "Let him release me," I silently pleaded. He put a hand over the top of the skull, covering up the carved opening and the water inside. "Be at ease. I did not come to offer you a drink. I came to give you a warning. Some of your charges have conducted business with the children." I stood there, staring blankly at him in incomprehension. He sighed, almost imperceptibly, and even though his expression did not change, I felt the weight of his disapproval when he spoke next. "These ancient beings do not enjoy having to explain themselves. The children with no wagon," he said, speaking slowly, as if that would help me understand. "Someone bought ice from them." Oh, I said. "Oh God, he won't save them." The man walked past me, his shoulder brushing against mine as he did. "No one will. Rule 18. You can buy ice from the children that approach your camp only if they have a wagon. Those are the children of other campers trying to make some extra spending money. They only upcharge by a few dollars, so consider tipping. If a group of children approach without a wagon, do not buy from them. Act like they don't exist. They will eventually leave." It wasn't until he was almost out of sight that I realized I didn't have any idea which campsite had purchased the ice. And there were a lot of people here right now. I did the dumb thing. I jumped on the four-wheeler, turned it around, and went after him. I pulled up along the side of the road, a respectful distance away, and called out to him. Hey, what campsite was it?" He paused, almost imperceptibly. "Are you thirsty after all?" he asked, and even though his words were mild, I understood it for the threat it was. "Nope, I'm good. Sorry for bothering you." I drove away before he changed his mind on granting me mercy. This was a terrible dilemma for me. I hadn't had anyone buy from the children without wagons before. Most people find their silent stares creepy, and the normal children are pretty aggressive with their ice roots anyway, so that no one needs ice by the time those other children show up. I had no idea what to expect. I had no idea how to undo what had been done. There was, however, someone I could ask. I went to my most senior camp. They're a group of friends that have been camping here for over 2 decades. The members have changed. to the point that the founders have all been replaced, but they've kept the traditions and are willing to work with me. As a result, I've gave them the best campsite. It's up on a hill, nestled in a clear spot among the trees, so that their camp has shades most of the day, and there's spots to hang hammocks. A gas line runs up the hill, so I have to keep part of it free of trees, which funnels the breeze straight into their camp. It's noticeably cooler there than the rest of the sites. It's also the most dangerous. I heard their shouting before I arrived. I slowed, cutting the noise of the engine down enough that I could make out words. I needn't have bothered. It was nothing but cursing. I couldn't tell if it was an inter-camp dispute. Doubtful. They kept the drama to a minimum. Or if they were angry at another group. Plausible. They had a couple feuds going on with the younger camps. Or if it was something else. Bracing myself, I hopped off the vehicle and walked in past the line of tents that marked their boundary. There were 5 people in the common area, clustered around the beer kegs. They had a cooler that was outfitted with 4 taps, and they ran lines up through a steel plate that was packed with ice, providing access with chilled beer from the tap at any time. The kegs were all homebrew. Right now, they had all 4 taps open, and a dark liquid was spilling out onto the ground. There was an odd smell in the air that turned my stomach. Like a butcher's shop, I thought, finally placing the smell. Is that blood? I ventured, walking closer. Yes. The woman that did the brewing kicked one of the kegs. All of them are blood. I told them I've come to talk to the thing in the dark. I had a question, I said, and I could also ask about the kegs while I was at it. Sure. She jerked her head at the back of their camp, where the trees crowded in close enough so that their shadows overlapped, and the forest floor was noticeably darker under the lattice of their branches. We haven't seen the solars go out all week though, so maybe it's not home. Roll 10. Keep track of what time the charge on the solar lights typically runs out. If the solars go out before then, do not leave your tent until sunup. Do not open the tent, not even to look. Stay in your tent, try to sleep, and wait for daybreak. I crept into the forest, wincing at the branches that cracked under my feet. Some of the creatures in the campsites were less malevolent than others. So long as they were respected, they wouldn't kill you or even seriously harm you. I'd spoken to the creature in the dark only once before, when I thought to put the senior camp near its lair. I asked if their proximity would disturb it. It replied that they would not, but nor would it hesitate to take any of them were they out in the open when it passed by. I don't know what happens to the people it takes. Their bodies are never found. The entire camp dreams of dying, however, of slow and torturous death in whatever manner they fear most. I dream of the little girl and the beast, and when I wake, I know that I'm going to be taken to the police yet again. The creature's lair is nothing more than a mound of broken branches, easily mistaken for a pile of stacked debris. There are some signs, however. The air grows colder as you approach. Sound falls away, encasing you in silence so that the only thing you hear is your own heartbeat. Mine was growing steadily faster as I drew nearer, and it felt like the darkness in between the piled branches was reaching out, gathering up all the light and dragging it to its doom. Flowers littered the forest floor, the white parasitic ones with bold heads, feeding on the tree roots running below the barren soil. "Excuse me," I whispered, my voice crackling. I coughed and tried again. "Sorry to bother you, but I have a question." A long silence. I waited, wondering if this was in vain, and perhaps the creature wasn't there. Then it spoke, and its words were rough like stones rolling against each other, and I winced in pain, for it felt like my head was between those stones, and my skull would crack under their weight. It asked me what I wished to know. I told it about the children, that someone had bought ice from them, and also the kegs as an afterthought. "The children are displeased by their lack of prey," it finally replied, and I pressed my fingers against the bones near my ear, as if that could help relieve the pressure. "They rejoice at finally being given an opportunity." To do what? The pile of branches shifted, the earth shifted, and I stumbled, realizing in sudden terror that that small lump of debris was not nearly enough to contain the creature inside, and it was far larger and perhaps far more terrible than I'd imagined. Its shrug had nearly thrown me to the ground. "The kegs are just the start," it sighed. "More will suffer. All will suffer. And then the dying will begin." My entire campsite was at risk. I felt cold inside. I could evacuate, I thought. I could claim there was something. A gas line rupture? Disease outbreak? There were some options available that would explain why I was throwing everyone out. But then, what about my livelihood? Would people return? I'm a little ashamed that greed factored into my choices, but this campsite has been in my family for generations, and I wasn't going to ruin it all now. Eliminate the one that started it. The ground bucked violently, and I was thrown to my hands and knees. Everything else will unravel. I stumbled to my feet, thanking it profusely. I gibbered my apologies for disturbing it, and my gratitude for its advice. Then I fled, fighting the urge to look back the entire time. Eliminate the one that started it. Those words rattled around in my head as I went from campsite to campsite, asking if they'd bought ice from the children today. I received quizzical looks from the newer campers, but the older ones answered solemnly, understanding the gravity of my question. They'd read the rules. Finally, I found the camp that bought the ice, and they identified the person that had made the purchase. He was elsewhere at the moment, but I could stop by later, they suggested. I said it was fine. I wasn't ready to talk to him. I wasn't ready to take the creature in the dark's advice. I thought, how bad could it be? It was only just beginning. Perhaps I could find some other way to resolve the situation. I spent the evening digging through my books of camp management and folklore, trying to find some sort of ritual or appeasement I could try. Yet the creature had said that the children were tired of not having prey. Prey I denied them with my rules, and that this would only get worse and worse until people started dying, that everyone was in danger. Night fell, and I reluctantly abandoned my efforts until the morning. My worry made it impossible to sleep through the little girl weeping outside my window and begging to be let in. She's not in the rules. She only harasses members of my bloodline. I was almost relieved when the beast came and dragged her off while she screamed in mortal terror, signaling that dawn was near. I threw on some clothing and jumped on my four-wheeler. I even skipped making coffee. I needed to see what had happened overnight. The man with the skull cup stood on the road, staring off into the trees and calmly sipping the water inside like he was taking his morning tea. I pulled up close by and killed the engine so we could talk. "Skipped your coffee, did you?" he asked. "Want a drink?" "I am quite satisfied, but I will gladly accept if you wish to share," I replied with gritted teeth. That thin smile again. Now he was just messing with me. I looked in the direction he was staring. A slew of people, 12 in all, dangled in midair. For one brief, horrifying moment, I could only think of the time I'd found someone that hadn't heeded my rules. Their gutted body dangling uncomfortably close to my house, like it was a warning. How the police had let me do most of the work getting it down, while they waited on the ground with their damn paperwork. I don't make my staff clean up the remains. That's asking too much. These were alive. I almost wept with relief. They'd been pulled from their tents and stripped naked, then taken into the woods. Their bodies were covered with bruises and scratches from being violently dragged across the ground. Then they'd been hoisted up into the trees and left hanging by their ankles from the boughs. "Next time it'll be their flayed skin hoisted in the branches," the man said. "You should end this quickly." I'm surprised by your concern." "I need people to share a drink with," he murmured. "I can't do that if everyone dies." I had to get my brother and both my uncles to help get the terrified campers down. They didn't fight much while we were doing this, just hung there limply, crying or whimpering softly. It made the job a lot easier. Dead weight is predictable, and we could pull them towards the ladder, get a good hold of them, and then cut the ropes and pass them down to the ground. Eliminate the one that started with it, as the abducted campers were taken off to the local hospital for treatment. I delegated the police paperwork to my brother and jumped on my four-wheeler. I returned to the camp that had bought the ice and called the man responsible aside for a conversation. I asked him if he'd bought ice from some creepy children with no wagon, and when he said he had, I asked why he'd broken one of the rules of how to survive camping. It was Rule 18. Hadn't he read it? "Oh," he said bleakly. "That one, well, there are a lot of rules." I took a breath, held it a moment, reminded myself that the majority of people have good intentions and don't do things simply to be contrary or cause trouble. That it is my responsibility as both camp manager and a decent human being to be understanding and help people because we have a common goal. I want them to have a safe and fun camping experience so they can come back. And they want to have a safe and fun camping experience so they can come back. This man didn't ignore my rule simply out of spite. It was an accident, an unfortunate accident. I asked him why he'd glossed over that rule. My tone was polite and friendly, without a hint of condemnation or judgment. That's the important bit. People respond in kind. So long as I didn't accuse, he wouldn't become defensive, and we could have a productive conversation. I've done a lot of reading on conflict resolution and behavioral change. He hadn't taken them seriously, he admitted. He'd certainly read them, intently in fact, because he thought it was a joke, but it was a clever joke, and he enjoyed it. But real? Nah. He pointed to his tent, showing how it had 3 feet of clearance between the other tents. Roll 4. And that they bought a longer hose, so they didn't have to split the closer one more than 3 times. Roll 6. The will was there. My system was flawed. It didn't change what I had to do. I thanked him for talking to me and walked away. Then I went into the woods and gathered some things. It took a while to find them all, but I'm familiar with my campsite, and I know where these things are likely to be found. Then I returned to my house with the mushrooms in hand. They're called Destroying Angel, Amanita verosa. I crushed it and took the resulting juice, careful not to touch it with my bare hands, back to his camp. I poured it into his reusable water bottle, swirled it around to coat the sides, and then left it to dry. They wrote the initial symptoms off as mere food poisoning. By the time his campmates took him to the ER, he was suffering from liver and kidney failure. They did their best, but I had to put a generous dose in that bottle, and his body simply could not keep up. Not even with medical intervention. He was dead within 36 hours. The police dropped by, of course. I talked with them for a bit. We commiserated on how difficult it can be to protect people from themselves, and that was the end of it. They understand what it's like in the forest. I feel I am to blame. I know the rules are ineffective, but they were easy. That's what I relied on. I wrote off the deaths as isolated incidents instead of warning signs that I wasn't doing enough to determine if my rule list and other measures were accomplishing their intended purpose. You know what does help people change their behaviors? Storytelling. It's one of the most effective techniques. Far more effective than a list of rules, which, according to research, is the least effective method, and the most prone to antisocial behavior, which is basically people deliberately sabotaging the system out of spite. Instead of telling someone, "Do this," you tell the person a story that demonstrates the behavior you want, preferably true, as that carries more weight. And the more personal it is, the more the individual will relate, and subsequently accept what you are trying to tell them to do. I'm a camp manager. I don't have a list of rules because I'm trying to ruin your fun. I have a list because I'm trying to help you from coming back to camp and finding your tent collapsed and full of rainwater and having no dry clothes or nowhere to sleep. I'm trying to keep you from spending half a day setting up tents because you didn't plan where everything would go in advance. And I'm trying to keep you from doing small, simple things that could result in a horrific and most assuredly agonizing demise. Well, that's it for the story today. Please show my tiny little channel some support by subscribing. It's totally free. Just click on my icon on the screen or the button shown below the video, and we'll see you again next time. Have a great night.